DRS, the drag reduction system, has been a part of the Formula One rules since 2011. Conveniently, the year after the last race of 2010, when Fernando Alonso spent much of the distance in Abu Dhabi being held up by Vitaly Petrov's Renault. And at the time, there's a lot of talk, if only DRS had been brought in earlier, we would have had a much better motor race. Well, it was brought in 2011. And there have been ups and downs. A lot of people, of course, will say DRS has done its job. It's enabled one car to overtake another with more ease in Formula One. Thus, we have more overtaking. But the reality is that DRS, basically since 2011, has continued in that same form, despite the new technical regulations in Formula One coming into play in 2022, all designed to make it easier to follow another car. You would have thought at that point there might have been a revision about DRS, whether to maybe modify the system a little bit, take it away altogether, but no, it continued all the way through. And guess what? At the back end of that 2022 Formula One regulation, they're still saying it's much too difficult to overtake the car in front. So it's probably not DRS. It's the size of the cars, it's the weight of the cars, it's the wake of the cars, it's a million other things. Meanwhile, DRS continues on. So what are they planning for DRS in 2026? Well, in terms of enabling overtaking, making it easier to overtake, DRS will not come into play, in theory, from 26 onwards. Instead, they're going to have a manual override mode, an MOM, I guess they're going to call it, in which the driver can basically press a button and get another 200 horsepower, providing in a detection zone, a little bit like DRS at the moment. He's within half a second of the car in front. So it'll be a power boost, a little bit as they've been using in IndyCar all these years. But there are two main differences. One is that it's going to come from the hybrid side of the engine, from the MG UK energy harvesting. It's going to come from there. And then as an aside to that, the driver then is free to reharvest that power whenever he wants. So there will be some strategy coming into play in that area. That's probably quite an interesting aspect of this whole new 26 reg. But unlike America, the car in front won't also have the privilege of being able to deploy extra power, which I think is a really good thing, because it shows that the Americans think that defense is just as important as attack. But in Formula One, the whole thing is about overtaking, so they're probably never ever going to allow that. And I think they're missing a trick there, because actually to have a power boost to get away from the car that's just got within half a second of you in the detection zone could make for some really good defense. And in my opinion, defense is just as appealing as overtaking, as attack, if you like. So that's the first thing. DRS will not be used for overtaking, but there will be effectively DRS in another part of the 26 Formula One car. It's not being called DRS as such, it's being called active-aero, and that's because it affects both the front and the rear wing. That's part of it. And secondly, because it is something that the drivers can use throughout the race at specific points of the circuit. So why are they doing that, and what is the desired effect of this active-aero? Well, it's because of the harvesting, it's because of the electric side of the new Formula One regulations, with all the energy harvesting that will be taking place. The, let's call them the powers that be, believe that there could be an optics problem, because top speeds may not be any quicker than they are now. They might even be slower. And that is a look that, as I say, the power brokers, Liberty, the team owners, all the stakeholders don't want around Formula One. Now, I've raised the point that for me, top speed, and I think I speak for most of the fans, top speed is relative. You can't actually tell whether a car's doing 300 kilometers an hour or 330 kilometers an hour or 350 kilometers an hour if the racing is good, if they're closely matched, and they fit the circuit in terms of safety, runoff area, and all the other aspects that are so important. What difference does it make? Well, I've been told that it's all about numbers, and what we want to see on the onboards is how quick these cars are going in a straight line when they have the active-aero deployed. So in terms of winning that argument, I think it's been lost already, but I still think they're missing a trick here, because they're going into a new area of aero completely in order to be able to say these are the fastest road racing cars in the world. And so what will happen is that there will be designated areas around each circuit on which the drivers on every lap, Friday, Saturday and Sunday during the race, can deploy the active-aero. And that will give them a big boost in terms of top speed and speed through the air. But it's not as simple as that, in my opinion. And there are certain other factors that come into play here. And to understand those, I think we should look again at where DRS is now and where it was back in 2011. We've had glitches with DRS, both in the Parc Fermé scrutineering area and also in terms of massive accidents. Scrutineering looked no further than Lewis Hamilton's drama in Brazil in 2021, when the car was legal with the DRS closed, but they found in Parc Fermé with the DRS open that there was a couple of millimeters out and he was moved to the back of the grid. You could possibly blame that on Max Verstappen, who was caught actually touching the rear wing of Lewis's car in that Parc Fermé and was fined for doing so, but probably unlikely. More likely is that it's an additional complication on the car that on this occasion the technical engineers at Mercedes got slightly wrong. It's an added complication. And then we have this added complication as well when it comes to failures. 2018 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Marcus Ericsson, enormous accident when his DRS failed to close. The car somersaulted, barrel rolled. He got out of it okay. Nobody was injured. No marshals were injured, even though he's very near a marshal's post. And was able to walk back to the pits. But it was a big accident. It was a big wake-up call, I thought at the time, about adding something to all the other complexity we have in a Grand Prix car, adding even more technical complexity. In other words, the more you add, the more things that can go wrong. And it did go wrong at Monza. And we saw again very recently at the Japanese Grand Prix that it can go wrong even in 2025. It was a perfect storm for Jack Doohan. He wasn't allowed to run in FP1 because his car was given over to a very lucrative third driver deal. So he got into the car for FP2 on what is obviously a difficult circuit, Suzuka. He'd been there once before, but obviously going there again in a Formula One car, completely different deal. And had a massive shunt going into turn one effectively on his first flying lap with the DRS still open. Most people have said since then, well, that was Jack Doohan's mistake. He should have closed the DRS as he went into turn one. But bear in mind, A, he didn't do any running in FP1, and B, turn one at Suzuka is a very unusual part of any racetrack. You can turn the wheel before you brake. And that's exactly what Jack did. In reality, of course, he should have closed the DRS before he turned the wheel. And I guess this also comes under the heading of where he was managed by the engineers as well. But in a rush, wanting to go quickly, he turned the wheel. There was DRS was still open, and he just went straight off into the barrier. 50G. He was okay as well, but it was a 50G shunt. Again, this comes under the heading of an added complication that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have DRS. And I've made that point before. And I just like to say at this point that I think we're unfairly judging the 22 to 25 Grand Prix cars, the aero factor of those cars, basically created by Nicholas Tombazis and Jason Somerville, two excellent aerodynamicists, because we're seeing DRS being used in the usual places, obviously the same detection zones, the same activation zones. But the reality is that even without DRS, if we had no DRS on these cars at all, we'd still get overtaking for sure. We'd get overtaking due to pure slipstreaming, pure towing, also a little bit of the engine cutting business that comes into harvesting the engine even on these hybrids. And around tight circuits, it's very clear that DRS has no role to play because these cars are so big, so heavy, so wide that regardless of what you do, it's not going to make any difference. By continuing with DRS throughout this current era, 22 to 25, we're effectively saying we don't think F1 did a good enough job on these cars. We've got to add DRS as well. It's very difficult to prove it, of course, but I don't think we would have had a lot fewer overtakes had we had no DRS on the car at all, because these cars are very good at towing, as we've seen at fast circuits like Saudi Arabia and Baku, on the straight in Baku. There's one more DRS drama, of course, that's very fresh in our minds, and that is George Russell in the Bahrain Grand Prix. He did have a sensor problem on the car in the closing laps, but it really affected DRS more than anything else, and he's having to manually use DRS. And at one point, of course, he got it slightly wrong and he had the DRS open when it shouldn't have been. He'd gone across the sensor line. And luckily he wasn't disqualified. He wasn't penalized for that. But it shouldn't have happened. You know, he's a pure racing driver, and to have to faff around with DRS, applying it manually at that stage of the Bahrain Grand Prix was over well and beyond the call of duty. As it was, he still beat Lando Norris into P2 in Bahrain. Fabulous drive by George Russell. But then underlining my point, I think DRS is an added complication that we don't necessarily need. Anyway, fast forwarding now to what we're going to see in 2026 and why we're going to have this active aero. It's to make the cars quicker in a straight line. And what worries me now, and the real purpose for this video, is that it appears that the areas that are going to be selected where the car can be in full active aero mode won't always be just in a straight line. It might involve some kinks, which are flat out. It might involve maybe even the turn into a corner. It might involve a corner like 130R. And notice that the speed trap in Japan at Suzuka, 130R is halfway through 130R. So it might involve that. And bear in mind, we've had failures in DRS before. Bearing in mind this is going to be a more complicated system. It's going to be the front and the rear wing, and it's very, very, very important that it works perfectly. Because if you get a slight glitch and you've got less front wing than you should have, or less rear wing, and it's a complicated system, there's going to be a drama. Absolutely for sure there's going to be a drama. And then beyond that, there's the question of equality. Some cars are easy flat through a kink that some other Grand Prix cars won't necessarily be easy flat. They'll be flat, but they'll be a little bit more edgy. And then of course, other factors come into play, like how much fuel they're running, what tires they're on. Are they on high grip soft tires? Are they on medium tires, hard tires? All these differences will come into play if they start having kinks as part of the active-aero program. And my understanding is that there will be some kinks. And a good example of the kink is the left-hander going into those quick S's in Melbourne. And we've already seen how edgy they were just with the rear wing DRS adjustment. And bear in mind now, we're basically multiplying the possibility of things going wrong, and we're affecting the balance, the front and the rear of the car now. It's not just a problem with the rear wing, it's also a problem with the balance caused by maybe a small problem with the front wing. And again, I come back to my point, a bit like DRS in this current era, I don't think we need active-aero. I don't think we need to be treading in that area of Formula One when there's so much other stuff that we're going to be working on. The new 50% electrified engines, the new chassis, the new aerodynamics. And I hope I speak for quite a lot of Formula One fans when I say that we're not that worried by how quick these cars are in a straight line. 320 kilometers an hour, 340, 350. Can anybody tell the difference if they can't actually see a readout digital display? It doesn't matter. So long as the racing is good, so long as the cars are reliable, and much more importantly, so long as we can avoid horrendous accidents that might be the result of a failure with the new active-aero program. I think everyone would think that's a positive way to go into the new regulations. And what worries me right now is that since that Jack Doohan accident in Japan, there seems to have been very, very little talk, or none at all, about the upcoming active-aero that we're going to see in 26. Because if that can happen just with the basic DRS affecting the rear wing, with 14 years of experience running the system, and a driver like Jack Doohan, who's very, very good, can have the sort of shunt that he had, purely because of some error in the way that DRS was used, for sure it can happen if you complicate things and add the front wing into that as well. And there's no talk about that. And that's why I'm doing this video, because I think Formula One needs to think really clearly about whether we need to go down this active-aero path and how important it is to be able to tell the world about top speeds. Because A, that's another technical complication. And the last thing we need is more disqualifications or penalties because something else has gone wrong. So the bottom line, in my opinion, is that with push-to-pass or the manual override mode, whatever you want to call it, they don't need DRS or active-aero, particularly as the push-to-pass will work off the hybrid unit, so the extra power delivery will be immediate rather than a gathering of speed as we have at the moment with DRS. In a perfect world, we'd just use the push-to-pass for overtaking and also allow the leading driver to use it to defend. Then you'd have real cat-and-mouse battles rather than just one driver being a sitting DRS duck. And beyond that, potentially if something goes wrong, it could be very, very serious.